Hello and welcome to 100 Days In with me, Will Hall. This is the podcast where we deep dive, yes, not literally, figuratively, into the first 100 days of a company told by the founder themselves. Male fertility. Not the words you would expect to have been uttered by myself, but here we are. And the reason I say them is because our next guest, Lily, is the founder of Jack Fertility, the male fertility kit aiming to break the stigma around male reproductive health. Can I just say before we go into what the podcast entails and what you can expect to learn, Lily has a fantastic voice for podcasts that's very enticing, optimistic. It just sounds great. I'm debating whether to leave this in or not. It was just my experience when editing the podcast. In the episode, though, expect to learn why having a co-founder is so important, how manifestation and visualization has helped Lily create Jack Fertility and how it could help you, and why the name of your company is more important than you think it is. It's time to go 100 days in. Are you ready? Let's roll the tapes.
From a scientific perspective, it doesn't make any sense. And I just thought it's ridiculous that there's no human alternative. Both looked at each other and we were like, we absolutely do not want other corporate jobs. Yeah, my best advice is to reverse engineer it. I think manifestation visualization is very in right now. I really think that the more we can make it real in a relatively low risk way, that is the easiest way to start really hyping yourself up and starting to see how attainable it can be.
I actually had a guest. I had a guest on once. I caught up with her the other day, actually, and she said that thing threw her so much that we had to start again after I asked the first question.
That's so funny. Poor
Yeah,
thing.
she was like, just so much pressure, the countdown thing. So anyway, but Lily, I think we spoke last week, and we're introduced by one of my previous guests. And I must admit, a lot of my guests I've had on are food and drink orientated. This is totally different, and that's what drew me in. And I was so sold when we had that pre-call last week. I was just thinking, yeah, we have to go into this more, because I had actually no clue how I'd start a business like yours. And also for context, by the way, for the audience, Lily has had the most strenuous and full day. And after this ends in 45 minutes, she has a fundraising call and then some more stuff afterwards. So it is nonstop, probably more nonstop for you than for me. But yeah, I would just love to hear more. And I think let's kick off like this. I'd love to hear more about your background, early life. But was there any signs as to why you wanted to start Jack Fertility? Does it make sense now, or did you always want to be an entrepreneur? I think there's just so much I'd like to go into more there.
Yeah, let's jump in. Well, thank you so much, Will, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So many things to think about, but the quick and short answer to your question is no, I did not think I would be an entrepreneur. I, however, knew that I wanted to do something that allowed me to be autonomous. It took me a long time to ultimately realize that would be to start something myself. But yeah, looking back, there's really not much in my early life that would suggest I wasn't, well, that's not true. I did a lot of lemonade stands and that sort of thing, but I wasn't exactly starting multi-million-dollar businesses or anything like that. I really instead was focused on science. So from the time I was really small, I wanted to be a physician. That was all I wanted to do when I went to undergrad. And so I had gone to a STEM high school. I was so focused on this goal. But what I also wanted to do was, in the spirit of being a good researcher, I wanted to make sure I knew what I was going into and optimizing for my career. And thankfully, during undergrad, I started shadowing in clinics and trying to figure out what kind of physician I wanted to be, but started developing a sneaking suspicion that being a primary care physician was probably not the right role for me. And as I explored other specialties, realized that actually healthcare might not be the best fit for my personality, as well as spending some time at the US Department of Health and Human Services as an intern in health policy in Washington, D.C., where I discovered the cruel realities of US healthcare and realized I actually wanted nothing to do with the whole sector at the time. Did advising startups and ultimately got hired by a growth stage AI drug discovery company because I sort of rediscovered my scientific roots, realized that my science degree wasn't as dusty as I thought it was, could still understand what they were talking about, and then translate it, importantly, into the corporate speak that investors needed or that business development people needed. So yeah, I started working with the founders, grew the team from about, I guess I was employee 19, and when I left, it was about 45 people, and did their US expansion during COVID. It was really an amazing experience. But what I found through all this journey was really getting empowered to do things myself and backing myself. And yeah, ended up meeting my co-founder in business school, and yeah, somehow found myself in the world of male fertility. So that's been a lot of information from me, but yeah, that's the origin story.
That is quite the journey, Lily. I feel like I was on that with you as you were describing it. Are you, are you look, I'm sort of torn now. I want to jump into the 5 things that you felt in the first 100 days were integral to Jack Fertility. Just a couple bits before. Are you naturally just an interested person? Because there's lots of different sectors that you've worked in, whether that be medical, law, and then there's offshoots of medical that you did afterwards, and then you were doing the more entrepreneurial things. There's so many, I suppose they are connected, but some people just have a super linear career where they study something at school and then they study at college or university in England, and then they work in that job and then they retire potentially. That's quite linear. Yours, you've definitely moved around the arts a bit here. Are you just a really interested person, do you think? Inquisitive and quite driven as well, given that they're quite high caliber jobs.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I would agree with that. I am incredibly curious. And I think one of my strengths is I see simultaneously, I hear your point of it is disparate, but for me, it just made total sense because I think one way to put it is my entire education, and I think part of it is the difference with the American school system is that you have such large breadth of what you study. And my undergrad was a liberal arts college, so we were part of how I found philosophy was that we were required to take courses across many different disciplines. But that's just sort of the way my brain works, where I would see just the parallels of, for example, studying the scientific method and looking at basically observation of natural laws. In my mind, it was so similar to how you analyze human designed laws, or for example other things where I think I'm really drawn to passion, where people really care about things and really understanding why they feel that way. um, and yeah, making sure that it's all for a purpose as well. I think that's the other thing is in corporate, and part of my
Mm.
entrepreneurial journey was there's a lot of stuff that I think we just accept from the status quo of just saying, yeah, it is what it is, and that's the way to do things. And I think I can be quite contrarian. I'm often the role of the devil's advocate and intentionally will sort of prod at things to say, why? That's always been my big question, often to my detriment,
Mm.
actually. I often need to stop asking why and just do. But I think that's also where I found like really deep satisfaction with what I do. Like I don't have any regrets. Like often, more bearish people have said to me like, oh, did you give up because you didn't get into the school you wanted to get into or whatever? And of course I, one, can back myself and say, yes, I did get
Mm.
into schools, but I also, like, if someone turned around to me and said tomorrow, like, yeah, you can just go be a doctor, I'd be like, absolutely not. No, thank you. Because I know it's not the right role for me, similarly to being an attorney. And I think I was part of that was I can I can credit the US educational system also with you have to pay so much money to get these degrees that when you're staring down, like I was going to go to law school and I was like, I'm about to go $300,000 into debt. Do I really want to do this job? And having done it for 2.5, almost 3 years at that point and seeing
Mm.
the
Yeah.
other side of it, I was like, absolutely not. Um, So, long way of answering. Yes, I do think I am driven.
Round trip. Um, I, I just need to be so rude now. I am sorry. Halfway through that, my boss called me from work. I just need to bound back for 2 minutes. Sorry, this hasn't happened to me before. So I
That's okay.
literally like 2 to 3 minutes and then carry on. But let's,
Yeah.
yeah, no, sorry. He's yeah, I don't know what's calling me back. But then let's go. Yeah, then let's talk about the period when you decide the idea bit of when you decide to create Jack Fertility, meet your co-founder, and then let's hammer those 5 points. I think that would just be incredible.
Yeah.
Sorry, Lily, this is really rude of me. I do
No, no, no,
apologize. I
you
just
can
need to call in.
pause. Yeah, for sure. Let's just pause. I'll think about my little next bit. So you pause.
Yeah. One sec.
Sounds good.
So we've gone through your background. It's incredibly illustrious. I love the fact that I think it's clear you're just super interested in things, and I'm sure that plays into your likelihood of success as being an entrepreneur. Like, you have a natural interest in things, and not everyone does. With this podcast, we want to focus on the first 100 days. Like, how does this thing get created? And there's 5 things you sent over that are super helpful and very clear. But before we go into those, it'd be good just for you to give a bit of a summary as to that formulation of the idea of Jack Fertility. Did you come up? Did you come up with the idea when speaking to your co-founder, who you have on board now, or was it something that you stumbled across? Like, how does that idea creation work? And then how quickly did you act on the idea and start putting the building blocks in place?
Yeah, fantastic question. Because yes, I really did not expect to become a sperm entrepreneur, as it were. What I did know is that I wanted to build something that mattered. And so, to your question of was it my co-founder? Yes. So Nick and I met on the first day of the Oxford MBA. So he was the first British person I met, was super kind with all of my silly American questions. And we were in the same study group. So we worked academically together for the first term of the course and realized immediately that we were really compatible in terms of working. I'm an extrovert, he's an introvert. He's super interested in content and design, and I'm much more about like strategy and data and all of these other pieces. So we knew that we worked really well as a team, but this was in fall 2019. And then in March 2020, he and his wife went and had their first baby while the rest of us were navigating COVID. So they had to go to the hospital, deliver the baby, and then be locked down with this brand new infant and navigating how to become parents. So Nick deferred to the following year while I was working at the growth stage startup. And then we kept in touch. I stayed in the UK. And so got to meet the baby when lockdown was sort of initially eased. But then because we had become such good friends, when Nick returned to Oxford to finish the MBA, he very vulnerably shared that he and his wife were going to start thinking about trying for their second baby, and he wanted to get tested. His wife had loads of different options to test remotely, but he couldn't get an appointment because you had to be in person, which is already an awful, awkward, embarrassing, emasculating situation. It's like the films are even doing a nice job of showing what that can look like. And he, one, personally didn't really want to get tested, but two, he was just really shocked that there was nothing that you could do remotely in the age of popping PCR tests through the post, as we all were doing at the time. So as his science friend, he asked me why this was the case. And I said, from a scientific perspective, it doesn't make any sense. All of animal livestock conception happens through artificial insemination through the post. And I just thought it's ridiculous that there's no human alternative. So initially I started Googling, and then all of a sudden that turned into about 6 months of us coming up with the idea that became Jack, while also challenging ourselves consistently that surely we didn't come up with this. But I should also share that Nick's background is in fast-moving consumer goods marketing and in consumer insights. And what we discovered the second we found, okay, this is a terrible user and customer experience, started thinking about the dynamics of the fertility market, about how it's 2/3 privatized in the UK, the way that fertility clinics are incentivized, usually not to treat the male factor and instead have women go through IVF. The number one reason why women have IVF in the UK is actually due to male factor infertility. So 37% of cases are entirely due to the male factor. And also the fact that the global trend is that sperm counts are down almost 60% over the last 50 years due to a combination of environmental and lifestyle factors. So we saw, okay, there's sort of a big crisis coming. We need to get ahead of that. So that was also like, why now? And I think that's a really important thing for people to ask when they're starting a business is it the right time? And is it the right time for the market? And so for us, we saw that there were a number of really successful startups in the US doing this. They can't come to the UK for a variety of regulatory reasons, but the demand is absolutely there, especially on the direct consumer front. So by just doing those classic kind of market validation things of asking people how they would want to be tested, explaining the issue, and then really classically just kind of mocked up some designs and said, basically, like, would you buy this to strangers? And they said yes. That was really what crystallized ultimately into what became Jack. And I think this sort of leads into the first thing that I wanted to mention for the first 100 days is like before we even started the company properly, we really became aligned on the mission, which was partially to destigmatize male fertility and male infertility. Given Nick's background and given my background and also just our personalities, we knew that we wanted to do the commercial side of things. And we also really wanted to get to the heart of why men don't get tested. And frankly, we have pretty childish senses of humor. And so we wanted to leverage the puns and really sort of take the fear and all of the really awful aspects of infertility away. And both looked at each other and we were like, we absolutely do not want other corporate jobs. We only would want to build businesses like with each other. And we knew it was the right time from sort of at the time at a macroeconomic level until basically, and that brings us to the really founding and committing to starting this as a venture, was the middle of 2022, which was basically when people stopped investing in healthcare. But these things happen.
Love that. And there's a couple ways you can slice that as well. If I'm listening back to this and thinking, how do I come up with an idea? One, you clearly, with your co-founder you met on the MBA course, the idea came through conversations with your co-founder. So that could be a takeaway for people. It's not the only route. They're obviously very successful single founders, but at least speaking to someone who's interested in roughly the same area as you can create an idea that is totally different to something you could come up with at the time. And then the second is, and actually this is a bit of a lateral thing, but you could just look at the US and see what they're doing in a sector you're interested in and go, well, they're usually a couple of years ahead of us in the UK. Why don't we just do a bit of read across there and just say, okay, well, this is taking off. Maybe it's something that we could have in the UK here. We've got a couple of years. So there's a couple of different strategies there that I think, I certainly think could work. And I hear it very similar with other founders. The 5 things, let's dive into them. You said there's a few bits that I'd like to start with first. So let's go with decided core values and mission. This has to be critical to guide all other decisions. So what does this mean in practical terms? If I'm someone that wants to follow that first step, what should I do, Lily?
I think the first thing that you do if you have a co-founder, and I think it was really critical for me because we literally asked ourselves, like, if one of us got tired of doing this, like what is, before we even started, we said, what does it look like if the two of us aren't doing it? And the answer was we don't want to do this if the other's not doing it. And I think that was very important to be transparent about. I think often I see co-founder teams, and in fact, a lot of the ventures that started at the same time as us and have since fallen apart, it's because they didn't align on this and what their vision was for the company. So for us, we knew that the whole point of this is to work together. And that's what has gotten us through the hardest times, is that at the end of the day, like, Nick and I are incredibly good friends. We're incredibly values aligned. And that's why I mentioned the values of the company, is that for us, we had a very clear idea of what we are willing to compromise on and what we aren't. And that was, at the time, it was really quite difficult to really crystallize on that, because of course, with startups, that really, to be successful, you need to be following the data. And for me, I think that's another aspect that we really learned quickly. And especially as a woman innovating in a male space, I was like, I really don't understand the male mind, but the data tells me what I need to know. And that's part of what's made us really successful. The other piece is, again, on the value side, is really mapping out how you want to come across in those initial conversations. So, for example, and I'll mention this in a moment about deciding the name, like we really wanted to be careful about one, how we position ourselves at the beginning, but also like what this ultimately ends up looking like. Like, do we want to be on the bigger wellness side of things? Do we want to be incredibly medical? Like, what is that? Are we willing to move from consumer to a B2B model? A lot of these conversations need to be hashed out at the beginning because those are the conversations you're going to have with investors. And especially when someone's dangling a really big check in front of you, you have to be ready to know what you're going to say yes for and what you're going to say no to. And that can be really tough. And we've turned down money in the past where someone loved the idea for Jack, but just couldn't get behind the consumer aspect. And we were just like, we've done the analysis. And part of that was because we did a huge amount of research. So that being able to write that up and have all of the desktop research and then also all of the sort of consumer insights research that we did, we know that anytime, even when we're super tired and are ready to kind of give up or sort of say, let's take the easy way out, we can true back to that and say, are we still committed to this? And we know because we were able to make that decision at the start and check in frequently on that, that hasn't changed. And we remember that when the times are tough and it's time to make that call, we know what we're all about.
So let's go on to that next bit.
Mm-hmm.
Came up with a working name. Is it as
Yeah.
simple as just plucking a name out of the air, or have I just underestimated how hard that is?
It is incredibly hard. However, when you're in our line of work, it's pretty easy. So, for example, with Jack, we ended up, I mean, we kind of said it as a joke initially. We were talking about puns and talking about that sort of thing, but it really crystallized for us because one, it was the only name we could ever remember when we were first coming up with the business. And I think that's really important. If you're consistently playing with 20 different names and doing all sorts of different branding exercises, and there's one that you just keep calling it even accidentally, there's usually something there. Maybe helpfully for anyone who's listening to this and trying to figure out what to call something. I mean, a lot of just the basic rules of thumb, which is, can people spell it? Can people say it? Is it really sort of like asking people and say it, like hearing what it sounds like to other people is really important. And I think we had an advantage being in Oxford because we were mostly based in the business school and there were literally hundreds of people who are interested in having this kind of conversation while also having such a disparate group of people literally just outside, at the train station or in the pub right there, being able to have all different walks of life react to different things. And I think one really important thing for us with Jack as well is that because we had established the mission, which was so much about removing barriers and thinking about why male fertility is so stigmatized, we wanted to make it super approachable. And so that's why we didn't call it something like andrology solutions or anything that was too medical or too difficult to spell, one, because no one wants to spell all these things, but we really wanted to make it relatable and something that people could talk about and maybe have a bit of a laugh about, and just not overcomplicate it. And then also it was really difficult to decide whether to include fertility or not, because we don't really want to be seen as, whenever I say fertility, particularly to investors, they always think of the infertility market. And so they're like thinking about treatments and IVF and all of these different things. And we're like, no, the whole point of this is to make sure that no one ever has to get to that point because they're developing a relationship with their reproductive health. And really wanted to humanize everything about it rather than trying to get into all of the medical and scientific speak, which often isolates people and is a lot of the source of fear in some of these conversations, especially on such a deep identity basis. So that was a lot of what went into Jack. And of course, especially with Jack, we were like, oh, if we expand to France, it can be Jacques or whatever.
Jacques.
But yeah, I'll leave that on to.
I think you actually touched on it there. Whenever I've been thinking about it in my head of, even this morning, I've got this podcast later, I'm interviewing the founder of Jack. Like I've only thought of it with that one word. I don't think I've ever obviously I know the name, but if I was saying it to someone else, maybe I'd say the name to start off with. But I don't know. I think naturally people are just going to shorten it to Jack. It feels a much more natural thing to do, isn't it? You shorten things. So I think that works quite well because it's, I don't know, it's like, it's kind of a male Jack, like someone's Jacked or Jack is a male name.
No,
Uh,
have to
yeah,
laugh.
I like personally, I think it works quite well.
Thank you. Appreciate that feedback.
Jack. Yeah,
Hmm.
it's good. I think it's easy to say. I think that's a good point around how are people going to say it and think about, is it something that people want to say? I do think a name actually is almost underrated. Like the product obviously has to be important, but a good name people just love saying in conversation. It's a marketing tool in itself, isn't it? It's like the vessel for the company orally. People just, if it's interesting, people will say it because it's interesting, and then people are like, oh, what's this company?
I do a lot of mentoring for startups in Oxford, particularly in the deep tech space. And so many of these folks are so brilliant. They have such cool innovations, but I'm like, I can't spell this. I have no idea what you're talking
Mm,
about. And frankly, it immediately turns me off. And I already have overcome a lot of barriers to even
yeah.
being giving them any time, frankly. So yeah, that is what I would highly encourage to anyone building a venture, and also not being too wedded to it. Like being, we tried to change Jack's name loads of times, and it was so beloved that I think if I ever said we're changing Jack's name now, there would be an uproar.
Yeah, you get too deep in now, so you're stuck with Jack, but I think it's a good one to be stuck with. Created a single document with all company information. So is this a business plan or is this a more admin thing? Why was it so important?
Yeah, I think there are two really important pieces there. Is one, when you're in your first 100 days, you're usually moving incredibly quickly. And so for me, like this has been the document that I go back to over and over again, which is one, like the working one line description of the company, the brief bio, my bio, Nick's bio, all of our links, because every time you're asked, whether it's a speaking engagement, it's introing the company, or filling out grant applications, pitching, all of this information. It all ends up being asked over and over and over again. But you also find by doing that over and over again, you end up pitching the business in slightly different ways. And they end up, as you do them more, and especially by month 2, you're realizing that there are different lenses with which to view the company and the venture. So as long as you have one document, and I think ours is now at like 60 pages, just a Google Doc, you control F to all the different keywords, and you have so many, it's such a rich source of material. And then you're not spending all of your time rewriting. Or similarly, just like, what is your company's house number, or what is the link to X, Y, or Z, and just having it all truly almost like dumped in one place has saved me countless hours, which really ends up um, leading to you saving massive amount of time. So couldn't recommend that
Yeah,
more.
very good efficiency play there. I like it because there's so people underplay or don't speak about the admin side of things as much. But actually, if you can optimize for spending as little time or as efficient as possible on the administrational side, that gives you spare time to do other things. So it's that's super important. There's one more I'd actually like to speak about. I know we're only 4 minutes from time, Lily. But and again, this is a good one. I had a guest actually that started a marketing company. He does Amazon advertising, and he was talking about this, and he was talking about protecting domain names, and that's what you did. So you said protected all domain names and social handles. So 2 quick questions, and they're going to have to be quite quick fire because I've been incredibly slow with this, and we're 4 minutes away from time. Why is that important, and how do you do it?
Yeah, we were actually advised by a peer company to do this because it caused them a massive headache. And so we actually were benefiting from lived experience both in our industry,
Yeah,
and had heard some really terrible horror stories about this. So I think also importantly to mention, we didn't really start publicly calling Jack until after we had secured all of those domain names. So we did that, even though there are a lot of platforms that we don't anticipate we would ever use, like, for example, Pinterest and some of the other sort of not traditional consumer health tech avenues. We still put Jack Fertility in just because we were like, if someone hears about us and says, oh, we could ultimately, sit on this. Um, that actually was really important for us because I easily could see that happening, or I've seen a few like spam accounts that I've ended up having to report. So that can be pretty harmless, but I've also heard some truly horrific stories of people either registering companies with the same name, or and then getting into really aggressive fights, or the, so you know, having to pivot your whole strategy away from a name. So we did that. We protected every version of Jack Fertility on whatever GoDaddy and all of the various platforms, even if we don't think we'll ever use them. And we definitely think it's been strategic to do that, especially when you're going direct to consumer. It's a little less important with B2B, except for you do want to be careful of your reputation. But yeah, that was really, really critical. And we have a couple other strategic domain names for things that we may ultimately end up going through. But funnily for listeners, if you're in the sperm world, there are quite a few domains that are either taken or can be quite high dollar to purchase. So
But great advice, actually. Again, I don't think that's really spoken about on business podcasts because it's quite practical and it's not the sexiest stuff in the world, but protecting domain names, as you say, is vitally important, especially for what you do. Before you go, we got 100 seconds, 60 seconds. I see the clock running down. I think what would be cool to end on is advice for listeners who maybe have an idea or half an idea, a quarter of an idea, but don't have the activation energy or don't feel like they can start it. They feel a bit in limbo, but they want to start something, but they have the idea that they feel frustrated. They're not starting it. Maybe they're not confident. I don't know. But what advice do you have for them to take an idea into something real? What's your best advice there?
yeah, my best advice is to reverse engineer it. I think there's a lot, I mean, especially sort of manifestation, visualization is very in right now, and using some of those techniques, even if you don't really subscribe to that, of just being like, what does my life look like? What are the types of conversations I want to be having? What are the things I want to be complaining about? And really sort of like with Jack, we sort of mocked up what, even before we had a lab or anything, we sort of mocked up what Jack would be and tried to really envision what that business looked like and what would be sort of the pitfalls, the strategies. And I think it's really important, regardless of whether you're in a consumer good or in a service or whatever it is your business is, really just try and visualize what that could be, and don't over engineer it. Just commit to one thing. And if you hate that, that's telling you a lot. And vice versa. If you stumble upon something that you don't want to be talking about, or identify even prizes that you want to win, or like how publications you want to be in, like what is the award that you want to be able to be standing up and receiving. And if you don't really like what comes into your mind, like amazing feedback, because you know it's not that thing, or it starts really crystallizing the vision and giving you that kind of motivation to be like, next year I want to be winning entrepreneur of the year. I want to be winning, in my case, you know, best sperm company, or you know, best viral media campaign, like whatever it is for you. I think really putting it in real life and saying like, this is the calendar invite I want to see, or like, this is the, you know, hotel I want to be booking for my awards event, or whatever's motivating you. Maybe it's, you don't want that at all, and you just want to be able to say, no, I shipped, you know, 10,000 products and then, you know, took a holiday or whatever. Obviously, you can tell I'm ready for holiday, but I really think that the more you can make it real in a relatively low risk way, that is the easiest way to start really hyping yourself up and starting to see how attainable it can be.
Amazing way to end the pod. Lily, thank you for your time. That was fantastic. And let's catch up an email tomorrow. That was just brilliant. And yeah, best of luck for your fundraising call
Thank you so
shortly.
much. Really appreciate it. Well, thanks, and chat soon.
Speak soon.
All
Thank
right.
you. Bye.